The most damaging material is yet to come because Yasir Qadhi said something in his interview that has become really a signature piece for Yasir Qadhi. Your standard narrative has holes in it. What narratives? Standard Islamic narrative has holes in it. That's where he says it. You want to see it? Stay tuned.
For many centuries, Muslims have been told the Quran is perfectly preserved, letter for letter and word for word. Imams, sheikhs, and top Islamic scholars have preached it over and over again. But now, the music has changed. Islam's own leading scholars now admits that the Quran was never preserved. In this gripping video, Dr. Yasir Qadhi, in an interview with Muhammad Hijab, reveals startling truths that challenge centuries of belief. Watch as Fadi and Dr. J. Smith dissects Dr. Qadhi's interview and what it means for the reliability of the Quran.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Fadi, and with me here in our studio is our dear brother, Dr. J. Smith, and we have been taking a deep dive into that damaging interview that took place on June 8th, 2020, between Dr. Yasir Qadhi and Muhammad Hijab. And we have basically dissected few parts of that interview last time. We raised a number of alarming questions that emanated from that particular interview, and we are going to continue along the same line by raising even more questions concerning the issue that was raised in that particular interview. As I mentioned, with me here in studio to unpack all of that for us is our dear brother, Dr. J. Smith. Dr. J, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
So last time you asked at least 6 amazing questions, of course, that logically will result from just reviewing that interview. If you'd like to comment on those and add more to it.
We're going to add 4 of them because I think we need to unpack. A lot of people have seen that interview, and I've heard many people come back and say, can you help me understand what the significance? It seems so damaging, but I didn't understand an awful lot of what he was saying. So let's continue with those. Here's number 7. He talked about the fact that that Muslims have a respect for the Quran. And there are certain things that they don't go beyond. They ask up questions and then they stop, and there's a red line. You can see there's a picture there. That's Yasir Qadhi pointing to the red line. You don't cross that line. Muslims do not cross the line. And that's the respect they have. And that's what he's grown up with until he went to Yale University. Remember, Yale University is in the West. He's from Houston. Yale University is in the Northeast. He had never heard these kind of questions, and now he was exposed to Western academia. And Muhammad Hijab asked him, well, is this where you had your crisis of faith? This is well known that he went through a crisis of faith in 1995. And he said, no, it wasn't really a crisis of faith. It was a crisis of knowledge. In other words, I didn't really understand. But then he quickly went into almost a mantra. Did you notice that mantra? I'm absolutely persuaded that it's the word of God. I'm absolutely persuaded that it is preserved. He went through almost a litany of things that he's memorized, almost to persuade himself there on camera that he has no doubt that this is the word of God. However, he didn't know how to answer these questions when he got to Yale University. This calls him a crisis of knowledge. So let's move on. That's what's happening there. Here, unlike in the West, he said, and he talked about the West referring to himself living in Houston, going to Yale University, versus the East, and he's pointing to hijab. He says, you in the East, he kept on saying you in the East, it's different for you. You're in a different world. Here in the West, I've got to deal with academia. I can't make statements like you can make on YouTube. You can say whatever you want. There are no red lines here in the West. You have red lines. I don't. I have to work without any red lines. I've got to come up with some type of answer. So he was admitting that there in that interview. And then he went on and said, the problem is that you, and he kind of pointed to Muhammad Hijab, yeah. Your narrative, your standard narrative has holes in it. Wow, when he said that.
Yeah, in other words, he's saying if you go to the East, there are holes, but you cannot explain them. In the West, at least, you try to explain them.
You try to explain, yeah. But you notice in the entire interview, he did not explain them. How many times did Muhammad Hijab, okay, since you can explain it, you're in the West, here's the blank Musaf, which one are you going to write?
You have to say, Muhammad Hijab's question was excellent and brilliant.
And it took 4 years for him to get at that. He'd been stewing. He had been asked, starting from that day in 2016. I can't say that that was the first time he'd ever heard that argument, because it's obvious to me that when he asked all those people to come and he would explain it to them, he was not able to. That's why he had to come to Yasir Qadhi. Yasir Qadhi is the world authority on this. He should know the answer. And he did say, this should be pretty simple. Which one is it? How many times did he say this should be a yes and no answer? Did you hear him say that? So let's continue on. Well, Western academics, Yasir Qadhi says, have jumped leaps and bounds on this issue. They've gone way ahead in the last 100 years. And there you can see a slide of the Western academics on the left versus the poor Muslims on the right, and there's a red line. See the red line between them? And
right.
There's Yasir Qadhi looking at both different categories. He doesn't even know he's standing in the West, but he's having to try to answer and give sense to those in the East, and the ones in the East are sitting there with big eyes because they're waiting for an answer. They're not getting any answer. They're not getting any answer for Yasir Qadhi. Why? Well, they look at the rest of us, those in the West, like emperor with no clothes. You know the story about the emperor little clothes, the little boy
right.
That's watching this emperor going no clothes, and he's the only one that explains why he doesn't have any clothes on. Well, that's exactly what they're saying to all the other Muslims. Guys, you don't have an answer for this. And that's why he was admitting that he's part of that group himself. I've never lectured on this subject, he said. Nor will I ever lecture on it except in my class. Take my class, we'll do a deep dive. To me, that's a huge admission right there.
In other words, I want to tell you secretly, behind closed doors, what I think.
Exactly. And in 25 years, now he's talking 25 years from 2020, that would make it 1995. That's when he got his doctorate. So from the time he got his doctorate on this very subject at Yale University, he's never done a lecture on it.
But wouldn't that interview would have been the perfect platform for him to explain it to everybody who's watching? Why should you take his class? For what purpose? It's almost sounded like I'm all about money. You know, it came across as if that way. I'm sure that's not what he meant. He meant take my class so that I can explain it to you. But why can't you explain it to everybody?
Because it should not be brought up in public.
Yeah.
Boy, did he come down hard on that. Take the camera off. Turn it off. Don't even continue this. Afterwards, I will explain it to you. I would love to have been there as a fly in the wall to see how would he explain it, if they even did go into this afterwards. Because he does come up with an answer when push comes to shove. Nonetheless, at this point, he was saying, I have never talked about it. I never want to talk about it. Please don't ask me this question. Turn the camera off. This is the most difficult problem for scholars in the last 1,000 years. Al-Jazari, listen, he spent 80 different articles writing about it, and he could come to any conclusion.
Dr. J explains and demonstrates how the Dr. Yasir Qadhi tried very hard to evade the question about Quran preservation. He even rebuked Muhammad Hijab for bringing it public, stating that it is never a topic that should be discussed in the public. He even pointed to a classic scholar, Al-Jazari, who wrote 80 different articles on the topic without coming to any conclusion. But Hijab pressed him on the question, as he needed an answer for his own audience. He finally succumbed and made the most famous statement in Islamic dawah history. The standard Islamic narrative has holes in it. The traditional understanding cannot explain some of the questions that are now being poked. He went further to say that the Islamic narrative is like an emperor with no clothes because secular scholars won't leave it alone and will keep poking it.
If he can't come to a conclusion, why do you expect me to come to a conclusion? Please, don't ask me, what should be written on this blank mushaf. He pulled back, and he even said, you're pushing me, stop this. You saw that. Don't ask me for an answer right now. You're not going to get an answer. If I haven't given an answer in 25 years, why do you expect me to do so in an hour-and-a-half interview? Nonetheless, Muhammad Hijab was persistent. He knew that he needed an answer. He wanted an answer.
Right. He insisted on giving him that blank Quran.
So finally he put his hand out once more. He put his hand out right there in the end. And he asked them, please, if I give you a piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and I gave you a pen, which one are you going to write?
So notice the question. He's almost saying, are you really telling me all of these Qur'at are the same preserved Quran, or one of them would be? That was his question.
He wanted to know. Yeah. And what did Yasir Qadhi say? Look at the little picture on the right. They're all the Quran. Just dive into to them. They're all the Quran. A little bit of this. He said, it won't be all of Hafs. It may be some Qalun, some Qisai.
An eclectic Quran.
Some Warsh. It was just a little bit of this. You can see like a witch with her brew. She's just mixing it up in her pot. And what comes out is the Quran we have today.